Psalm chapter 61 is only 8 verses long, but there are a lot of things contained in those 8 verses. It's attributed to King David, and most Old Testament scholars would agree that it seemed to have been composed during the rebellion of Absalom against David, his father, the king. In fact, there are even a few phrases in these 8 verses that would indicate that that may well be the setting of the composition of this chapter in the book of Psalms. And yet so many people, when they look at the story of Absalom's rebellion in 2 Samuel chapter 13, 14, and 15, actually miss much of the details of that story. It is not just the story of a young man who decides out of a greedy and evil heart that he's going to overtake his father and drive his father away from the throne. Within the setting of that story, Absalom's sister, David's daughter, is violated by Absalom's half-brother, another son of David. David does nothing. And yet the law of Moses is clear about that kind of sin, that kind of atrocity, that kind of crime. Absalom brings his sister into his own house and takes care of her for 2 years. David does nothing. Absalom sees inaction, lack of judgment, lack of justice, lack of compassion for his sister, and ultimately takes the law into his own hands. David doesn't follow the law. Absalom doesn't either, but Absalom takes the law into his own hands and kills his half-brother. And the story even gets worse. The tragedy of that rebellion of Absalom is a tragedy on the part of both Absalom and David. A lack of communication, a lack of action, a lack of understanding, an inability to tell each other what they feel, an inability to talk to each other at all. So what has happened with the mind of David as he's in exile and running away from Absalom? What's he thinking? What's he feeling? He gives us an indication of that in these 8 verses in Psalm 61. Beginning in verse 1 and verse 2, we found out what he feels, and he gives us a statement about what he needs. Hear my cry, O God, attend to my prayer. From the end of the earth I'll cry to you when my heart is overwhelmed. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. You hear his heartache. You can almost feel his pain. The despair and the despondency are obvious by this overwhelming aspect of things crumbling in around him. My heart is overwhelmed. But I'll continue to cry to you no matter where I am from the ends of the earth. I'm on the run. But I don't know how to solve this. I'm really not sure what to do. Now, hopefully by this time he's actually accepting blame for part of the things that have transpired, but still, I don't know how to do this, so lead me to the rock that is higher than I. I need something more secure upon which to stand. It's not me. And then in verse 3 and verse 4, he actually talks about what God has been to him in the past. This is what it says. You've been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. I will abide in your tabernacle forever. I will trust in the shelter of your wings. You've been a shelter for me. In what way? Well, he gives 3 different examples. Number 1 is that guard tower. You've been guarding me from the enemy. This time the enemy is in his own household, his own family, but David has been instrumental in causing this problem to begin with. But God has been there as a watchman on the wall, as it were. But the second phrase, I'll abide in your tabernacle forever, the word means without end, continually. I'm not going to stop. And even though we may be prone to think of that tabernacle of meeting that was constructed by the Israelites still in the wilderness of Sinai before they came into that promised land, and while we may think about the fact that that tent of meeting where they worshiped was still in use in David's day, I think the idea of that tent or that tabernacle is something that carries even a greater significance. And the nomadic lifestyle of which these people are familiar, to be invited into the tent of dwelling would be to be shown hospitality, to enjoy fellowship. I really think that that's what David is describing, along with the fact that I want to worship you forever. But I can't worship you in the tabernacle now because I can't even go back into the city. Then that third one, the phrase that he makes about trusting in the shelter of your wings, trusting in the protection that God provides. It's the same kind of trust that the child has for the parent. It's the same kind of picture. I'll trust in the shelter that you provide as a loving parent provides for his child. That's what God has done. That's what God has been. The very next verse, verse 5, David mentions what God has given him. And here's the statement. You, O God, have heard my vows and have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. A heritage, an inheritance. Centuries after this, when you find your way into the New Testament, in that first century, the Apostle Paul writes to the Christians in the city of Rome in chapter 8 and talks about the fact that we are joint heirs with Christ, an inheritance that we don't deserve, but that love of God has actually provided for us through the death and sacrifice of his Son. In the book of Galatians, in Galatians chapter 3, Paul mentions that inheritance or heritage or being an heir again. And this is what he says, the end of chapter 3 of Galatians. For you are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. We have a tremendous inheritance, even greater than that which was enjoyed by David as king. And here in Psalm chapter 61, he mentions that heritage that God has provided for him. And then in verse 6, 7, and 8, there are really two things that are suggested. Verse 6 kind of gives its way to another inclusive kind of statement in the second half of verse 7. And then the first half of verse 7 really kind of filters over in the subject of verse 8. Let me show you what I mean. You will prolong the king's life, his years as many generations. He shall abide before God forever. O prepare mercy and truth, which may preserve him. So I will sing praise to your name forever, that I may daily perform my vows. That's those verses together. If we separate the thoughts, listen to it this way. You will prolong the king's life, his years as many generations. O prepare mercy and truth, which may preserve him. The idea that's involved is what God will do. And David doesn't see his life ending in this rebellion of his son against him. He sees his life continuing, but he wants certain qualities to be present. Prepare mercy and truth that may preserve him. Mercy and truth in some ways have not always been at the forefront of the actions of David, especially in situations such as he's facing at this time in his life. So how does the first part of verse 7 fit verse 8? Listen to them together. He shall abide before God forever, so I will sing praise to your name forever, that I may daily perform my vows. Abiding before God forever. And again, that Hebrew word carries with the idea of continuing. I'm not going to stop. As long as I breathe, I'm going to be abiding in those ways. I am going to be before you continually. I am going to be singing praises to your name continually. I'm going to perform my vows to you daily. There's a recognition there in that last phrase, perform my vows to you daily. Even the phrase, I'll sing praises to your name continually. Thanksgiving, even in the midst of difficult days, even in the midst of difficult days. An obedience that I want to always render, and a devotion and a dedication that I will continue to have. We go through difficult days. All of us go through times in life when we seem like it's just overwhelming. I don't know what to do. And that statement from David, lead me to the rock that's higher than I, carries a lot of meaning. We recognize we can't do this on our own, and God is there to help. And has given us a tremendous book to follow that deals with so many different things we face in life in this 21st century, and the solutions are still the same. The characteristics and needs of humanity haven't changed. The guidance that was given centuries ago, in David's case, millennia ago, still work for us today. Lead me to a rock, to the rock that is higher than I. And may that always be a thought and a desire that we possess, and may we always, always give thanks to God and abide with Him forever. Please stay safe. I'll talk again soon.